People have been navigating this continent for 60,000 years. No maps, no roads, no writing, and they didn't get lost. Australia is enormous, about the same size as the continental United States, except over 85% of the population lives within 50 kilometers of the coast. About 35% of the country is desert. The rest isn't much easier. It's a continent that for 200 years of a colonial history required camels and road trains, and eventually aircraft just to get them from one end to the other. So when people picture how Aboriginal Australians lived before colonization, they tend to imagine a sedentary people, rooted to one place, defined by their patch of earth. That picture is almost entirely wrong.
We can look at some of the greatest migrations of people, tens of thousands of years ago to the most southern parts of the southern hemisphere. Big intergenerational groups of people traveling incredible distances. That's one of the things I don't think people realise. They think of First Nations culture in Australia as sort of sedimentary and, inland, whereas people moved fast around the coast. It was almost like a superhighway travelling along the east coast or the west coast or across the northern or southern coasts.
Not just the coast, the entire continent. A few years ago, scientists used computers to calculate how many possible routes could crisscross the country. They wanted to see if standing at any given point, what landmarks you could see, what pathways would seem possible. They came up with over 125 billion possible routes. Billion. And yet, when they included archaeological evidence, they found only a handful of routes that were taken over and over again. In other words, these pathways weren't random. They were planned. This was a people choosing a specific superhighway to travel on.
There's examples of pearl shell from Broome being found in the central deserts, for example. And, pearl shell is common in Broome. You can pick it up off the beach. But as it travels further and further inland, it becomes more sacred and is used in the ceremonial context because it has this special rain-making properties.
Pearl shell, picked up off a beach in Broome, Western Australia, carried thousands of kilometers into the central desert, where it becomes something sacred. That is not wandering. That's a trade network. Matt Pohl grew up in Byron Bay, the most easterly point of the Australian mainland.
My background is South Sea Islander and Torres Strait Islander. My family from New Caledonia came across to the Torres Strait in the 1870s, actually. But I grew up in the northern part of New South Wales, a place called Byron Bay. It's the most easterly point of the Australian mainland, actually. And beautiful beaches, everything. It's being the most easterly point, there's just so much that sort of even washes up on the beach and different things like that. So very lucky to grow in such a beautiful place. My mum used to run a surf shop, so surfing, fishing, sailing, all those sort of things, depending on what the weather was like, was pretty well where I spent a lot of my youth.
He is the manager of Indigenous programs at the Australian National Maritime Museum, and his work is the intersection of history, community, and objects, trying to return stories to the people they belong to.
I started out, exploring my own family story and family history. So I think I was able to turn my own sort of investigation of my own background into a career path. So a lot of my research is actually just being in that intersection of sharing historical archives, objects that may have been collected 150 years ago and connecting them with the descendants of the maker of that object. We have dusty old storerooms full of stuff that sit there for decades without people looking at them sometimes, and when you can actually really get into that storeroom, connect it with living community members, oftentimes we learn so much more about these objects than what we thought we knew about them just through talking to the most ordinary people out there in the community.
Before GPS, before paper maps, before written language of any kind. And how do you navigate 60,000 square miles of desert, mountain, and coastline? How do you know which way to turn when you can't see the horizon? And how do you pass that knowledge down, intact, across 100 generations?
So songlines are these interesting ways to preserve cultural knowledges. No one person knows every part of the story, but across 10 different language regions, those 10 different language groups will have one part of the story. So songlines connect.
Think about that. No single person carries the whole map. Each community holds one piece, and the pieces only make sense together.
In some parts of Songlines, they're points in the landscape, and sometimes those points in the landscape reflect constellations in the sky. You are navigating through recognising features in the landscape, and the stories of the songlines help tell you whether to go left here or right there, or different things. So the songline is a navigational aid. It's like a memory map.
Songlines contain thousands of years' worth of knowledge encoded in a song that might be shared across dozens of families and dozens of languages. The route is imprinted and narrated by song. You learn the song, learn the constellations, and you learn the route. Not a metaphor, not folklore, a navigation system. And it carries more than just direction.
Big pathways, I guess, from the coast to the inland, or from the west to the east, or the north to the south. There was just where you have an abundance of one material in one place, you have scarcity in somewhere else. So people are constantly changing, trading things like food and materials to make like hunting implements and stuff like that.
Water sources, seasonal food, safe shelter, trade partners, sacred sites, the entire logistical infrastructure of a civilization, encoded in a song, passed through language, held in memory.
The star navigation is when you're travelling at night, but people are also travelling in the day when there's no stars. So, there are two different worlds really, the sky world and the night world, whether you're travelling in day or night.
Day navigation by landmark, night navigation by constellation, two complete systems layered on top of each other.
The idea we have of 300 Aboriginal language groups around the country is only really a snapshot of where people were at one particular time. We know through kinship and different things like that that people generationally moved and seasonally moved at different times of the year or at different times of their life to different parts of the country. Elderly people would end up in different parts to where the younger people were living. Men and women lived in different parts of the landscape. The way Aboriginal culture was practiced on a day-to-day basis was a sustainable cultural practice that, not only allowed people to live on this continent for tens of thousands of years without contact from the outside world, but, to actually thrive.
And moving through all of this, language.
The idea of language, as we understand it in a European context, is not the same. Languages in an Aboriginal context are more like passports. They open doors for you to enter other people's territories and countries and to negotiate and to set up ceremonies, for example.
Passports, not communication tools, not just expression, access rights, social infrastructure, the currency of safe passage.
One of the practices that was really stamped out but was obviously highly sought after was the corroboree, where you would have people coming together and these great feasts taking place that would last weeks. And they're still practiced today. Different people would travel vast distances to attend different corroborees so that they could share knowledge, whether it's about how to survive in a particular environment or how to hunt particular animals or different things like that.
These weren't festivals in the modern sense. They were the internet. The annual synchronization of everything the network had learned.
In some places, the islands themselves match constellations that you see in the nighttime sky. And the groupings of islands and the way to travel between them is replicated in the understanding of those sort of constellations too. The environment you're living in dictates the knowledges that you need to survive.
On land, songlines encoded in geography. On sea, islands mapped against constellations. The same logic, scaled to the environment. A civilization that designed its knowledge systems around the specific shape of the world it lived in. From the very beginning, the English struggled. They didn't understand the land. They didn't understand the climate. They couldn't farm, and they starved. For the first few decades, the English were confined to a small area. Then they needed more land. The problem was this: the Blue Mountains, part of the Great Dividing Range, blocking the eastern coast from the interior.
It took them 20 years to cross the Blue Mountains until they actually followed the Aboriginal paths over to the other side of the mountains.
20 years. stumbling against a barrier that Aboriginal Australians have been crossing for tens of thousands. The route existed, they just didn't know how to see it.
When you look at the arrival of European technology, and it was just such a mismatched situation in the sense that people just didn't know how to see each other, literally, or speak to each other. One of the most remarkable things about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders is that they've preserved any of their culture and been willing and wanting to share it with the outside world, because they just had so much of their land and their cultural practices removed from them. Their languages, their knowledges were completely overwritten and obscured until relatively recently in Australia's history, when they have found platforms through places like museums to demonstrate their knowledge again. When you look at the history of Aboriginal art in Australia over the last 30 years, there's been no other art historical movement of more than tens of thousands of people who have never been to art school, but have taken over more than 40% of Australia's contemporary art galleries and commercial art galleries and things like that, through preserving knowledge of their country, their land, their maritime knowledges, their astronomical knowledges even, and used visual art as a language to record their own history for their own future generations.
Those dots and lines in the paintings, they're not decorative. They're maps, memory made visible, the songs continuing in a new medium.
When you look at the journeys and the pathways that people made in the deep past, I think you also see that reflected in where our modern highways are. It is the shortest route between a very long distance to travel in particular parts of the country.
There's a lot of overlap between Aboriginal pathways and Australia's highways today. In other words, modern Australia is literally built on top of the work and knowledge that Aboriginals forged here for centuries.
There's something really special in the way that, the vastness of the ocean is reflected in the vastness of the landscape in Australia, I think. When you're making some of those big trips around different parts of the country, you're staring at the horizon for hours at a time. And, you get into that contemplative space. That's a message that comes through working with a lot of elders and things like that who've lived in particular places their whole lives. It's not about the distances between all those different places, it's that special connection to one particular country where, your ancestors have also stared at that horizon for hundreds of days of their lives. There's just so much that has been untold about Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander past. The more we learn about First Nations Australia and its role in shaping the modern Australia which we all live in today, the more valuable it is for us to be able to see a better future for all of us.
60,000 years of navigation. No maps, no roads, no writing. Just the land, the stars, the song, and the memory of every person who walked this path before you. The songlines were never lost. They became the roads you're driving on. They became the borders of the country. They're in the paintings on the gallery walls, the routes the cattle stations follow, and the paths through the mountains that seemed impossible until they weren't. Knowledge doesn't disappear when you stop writing it down. It goes deeper. It becomes the land itself.
That deeper history of place, it has been overwritten by modern technology and modern culture and things like that, but it's still there if you know how to look for it, and if you want to look for it, you can see it.
Matt Pohl is the manager of Indigenous programs at the Australian National Maritime Museum in Sydney, and this video was made with respect for the communities whose knowledge this story belongs to.